welcome back to the deep dive. When you picture the Wailing Wall, the visuals are immediate. They're powerful.
Ancient stones, sun-drenched.
Right. Pilgrims from everywhere, hands pressed against that rock, heads bowed. It's just iconic.
It is. And it's presented globally as, the height of devotion, tradition, historical memory.
It's also that mandatory stop, isn't it? Almost every major political figure goes there. It carries this immense symbolic weight, both spiritual and political.
It really does. It's the ultimate nexus point, you could say. For most people, the public narrative is straightforward. Remnant of the Second Temple complex, a place for reverence, for connection.
And that narrative is, well, it's pretty much universally accepted.
It is.
But today, we're doing something different. We're setting aside that conventional story. We're taking a really deep dive into a radical counterinterpretation of that site and the rituals performed there.
We are. And it's important to state right up front, the sources for this analysis, the claims we're discussing, they come entirely from the work, the discoveries of Dr. Khaled Waleed.
Yes, published through his YouTube channel, Almighty Covenant. And what he presents is, frankly, a searing theological and political critique.
So our mission today, just to be explicit, is to move way past that surface interpretation.
Yeah.
We're exploring the claim that these rituals, the ones you see at the wall, they're not rooted in biblical tradition, not in prophetic monotheism.
Instead, the claim is they come from occult mysticism, representing a kind of fundamental inversion, theologically and politically, of what's considered true worship.
Exactly, an inversion.
And this critique brings up a core, really explosive question. It forces you to re-examine global politics, spirituality, everything.
Which is?
Why is this specific ritual, and the sources use incredibly strong language here, calling it a metaphysical sex act disguised as devotion? Why is that considered a necessary rite of passage, a diplomatic must-do for global leaders?
It's a staggering question. And Dr. Waleed's discoveries, they offer these remarkably specific historical theological components to back up this shocking claim.
Okay, let's unpack this. We really need to start at the beginning, establish the foundations. Where do these practices actually come from? Because according to this analysis, they're entirely post-biblical.
Right. We have to define the source material for the rituals first, because the central thesis, the core of Dr. Waleed's work here, is that the practices you observe at the wall, they're not derived from, say, the explicit commandments in the Torah.
Not from the covenant faith established with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob.
No, the argument is they're drawn entirely from later esoteric reinterpretations.
And the specific origin point identified is the 13th century Spanish text, the Zohar.
That's the one, the foundational text of Kabbalah.
So we're not talking about something dating back to Moses or King David. Mm-hmm. This is a complex mystical system developed much later in the Middle Ages. Yeah. A kind of layering of esoteric ideas onto the existing framework.
Precisely. The Zohar is absolutely crucial here because it takes traditional biblical stories, motifs, characters, and reinterprets them dramatically through this deep layer of mystical symbolism.
Introducing concepts that weren't there before.
Exactly. Ideas like divine emanations, different dimensions of God, things that radically change the definition of God itself. Think of it like this, maybe. If the Torah presents God's light as singular, pure sunlight, the Zohar acts like a prism. It breaks that single light into 10 distinct sephiro. These are seen as dimensions or attributes, each with its own character, and this fundamentally fractures that concept of singular divine unity.
So if the original tradition, the prophetic one, really emphasized God's oneness unmediated, Kabbalah introduces this complex structure, one that almost requires interaction, duality.
Yes, it definitely sounds like fertile ground for the kind of ritualistic interpretation we're going to discuss.
It seems so.
And this foundation, late in the 13th century, it was then significantly amplified centuries later by the Hasidic movement, which emerged in 18th century Eastern Europe.
How did they amplify it?
Well, Hasidism didn't just study the Zohar in an abstract, intellectual way. They popularized its mystical dimensions. They made them emotionally and, importantly, physically accessible to the everyday person.
Oh, okay.
They really emphasized two key concepts. Devekut, which you could translate as clinging to God.
Clinging, like holding on.
More like an intense, emotional, and mystical striving for union, a feeling of being utterly absorbed or consumed by the divine. And the other concept is kavanah.
Kavanah.
Yeah.
That means intention, right? Intentionality in prayer.
Yes, but again, intensified. In a non-mystical context, kavanah is about focusing your mind, being sincere. But in Hasidism, drawing on Kabbalah, it became this deep focused technique for aligning one's soul with the mystical dimensions, with the Sephirah.
So let's pause on Devakut and Kavanagh because these sound really key. How did the Hasidic movement take these, essentially mental or emotional states and transform them into the physical practice we see, like the swaying at the wall?
They shifted them from just abstract mental concepts into states of, well, sometimes described as spiritual intoxication, ecstatic physical engagement. Devakut became this passionate striving for union.
Almost desperate.
In a mystical sense, yes. And Kavanagh was the focused method, the intense concentration needed to navigate these mystical realms during prayer. The critique we're examining argues that by emphasizing that intense emotional and physical expression, it paved the way.
Paved the way for what?
To view specific physical movements, like the swaying, not just as aids to concentration, but as actual vehicles for achieving a deeper, hidden, symbolic union.
Okay, I see the connection now. That physical action becomes part of the mystical process itself.
Precisely. And that sets the stage perfectly for discussing the entity that the sources claim is actually being worshipped at the wall.
Right.
Because the argument is, it's not the transcendent singular God of the ancient prophets.
It's the Shekinah.
The Shekinah, yes. In this specific mystical context, she is the figure of paramount importance. She's understood as the feminine emanation of divinity.
Feminine emanation. Like a female aspect of God.
Sort of, but more distinct. She's seen as the localized, immanent presence of God in the material world. Almost like God's presence dwelling here.
And the critique points out how she's described.
It does. In the Kabbalistic texts, and according to Dr. Waleed's analysis of them, she isn't just a passive presence. She's portrayed as a quasi-divine entity and described in really intimate, sometimes explicitly erotic terms.
Wow. Okay, that immediately creates a huge conflict. A massive tension with standard Abrahamic monotheism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, which insists God is one, non-gendered, transcendent.
Absolutely. A God without earthly needs, without physical partners.
The source analysis draws that contrast very sharply, doesn't it?
Very sharply. Shekinah, in this framework, is defined not as the singular creator, but as a divine consort, one half of a necessary divine pairing.
A consort, like a wife or partner to God.
Effectively, yes, within this mystical system. And this introduces a metaphysical polarity, a masculine-feminine split in the Godhead, that the critique argues is entirely foreign to the original covenantal prophetic framework.
You need to grasp this polarity, this duality, to understand the core claim of inversion, right?
Exactly, because this polarity, it requires two interacting gendered components for the cosmos to function, according to Kabbalah.
So we have this feminine Shekinah, localized here on Earth, maybe seen as in exile, and she's seeking something or someone.
Yes, she is seeking union with the masculine component in this divine drama,
Which is
the Ein Sof. Ein Sof literally means without end. It represents the infinite, the transcendent, the unknowable, conceptualized as the masculine force in this Kabbalistic system.
So the Shekinah, the immanent feminine, is seeking union. You called it Yehud, with the Ein Sof, the transcendent masculine.
Correct. She's often portrayed as exiled, separated from the Ein Sof, and perpetually seeking this reunion, this cosmic intercourse.
What's fascinating here is, and this really drives home the inversion claim, is that the entire cosmic order in this mystical view seems to depend on human actions. Human rituals at places like the wall are needed to actually facilitate this divine reunion.
That is the absolute key theological dualism at the heart of the critique. For you listening, think of it maybe like this. Instead of a single, complete, unified God, imagine maybe yin and yang as already one integrated whole.
Okay.
This system introduces a fractured dyad, yin seeking yang, the unity is broken.
And human ritual is the glue.
Human ritual, performed with intense Kavanagh, becomes necessary in this view to repair that fracture, to unite these gender divine halves. And this focus on achieving erotic union through ritual, the critique argues, replaces pure, singular, unconditional devotion to the one God. It's a total shift in the object and method of worship.
Okay, so we've established the theological foundation according to the critique. This dualism, Shekinah seeking Ein Sof. Now we move to part 2. This is where the critique asserts that the actual physical acts performed at the wall, they are the method for achieving that cosmic union.
Right. And this brings us back to Kavanagh, that intense intentionality and the specific physical movement known as shuckling.
The swaying.
Exactly. The act of prayer here, in this esoteric interpretation, isn't just mental or verbal. It requires intense focus, yes, but also physical expression to align the worshiper with the flow of energy through the sephirah, these divine dimensions.
And the most visible physical expression is that back and forth swaying, the shuckling. You often see it performed with real intensity at the wall.
Very much so.
Now, I think most people watching that, they probably assume it's, just a sign of deep concentration, maybe nervous energy, maybe it's just an old tradition passed down.
That's the common understanding.
But Dr. Waleed's sources, the ones we're examining, they interpret this physical movement in a way it's stunning, almost shocking, esoterically.
They absolutely do. The critique claims that this shuckling, this swaying, is viewed by high-level Kabbalists, those initiated into the deeper meanings, as mirroring an esoteric sexual ritual.
A sexual ritual.
Yes. It's not seen as just random or traditional movement. It's interpreted as a symbolic thrusting. Symbolic thrusting, intended specifically to achieve, or at least contribute to, that mystical union between the divine, feminine, and masculine halves we just discussed, the Shekinah and the Ein Sof.
We need to be really clear about the language used in the source material here, because it's the absolute linchpin of this whole inversion plane. This analysis reframes traditional prayer into something called a metaphysical sex act disguised as devotion.
That phrase, or very similar ones like ritualized cosmic polarity, really captures the core of the critique. The language used is deliberately provocative, uncompromising, it's polemical.
They use other strong terms too, right?
Oh yes. The sources refer to it as an inversion of divine truth. They explicitly liken the practice to spiritual prostitution.
That's incredibly strong language. Why that specific term?
It's chosen very deliberately. It's meant to echo the harsh, powerful condemnations you find from the prophets throughout the Hebrew Bible. When they denounced idolatry, the worship of other gods, other forces, they consistently framed it as spiritual infidelity, cosmic adultery, a breaking of the exclusive covenant with the singular God.
So applying that language here implies that this ritual is seen as a fundamental betrayal of that covenant.
Precisely. The goal of the ritual, therefore, is radically transformed in this interpretation. It's not about asking God for forgiveness or praising the Creator in a straightforward way.
It becomes ontological, a performance.
Yes, ontological, a ritualized physical reenactment of cosmic intercourse between the feminine Shekinah and the masculine Ein Sof. And the worshiper, through their intense kavana and physical shuckling, acts as the conduit, the facilitator of that union.
This detail, it just fundamentally transforms how one might perceive the site. For the average person, maybe an unaware tourist, or even a devout but non-Kabbalistic Jew, it's a prayer wall, a historical site.
A place of reverence.
But for the adherent to this specific mystical framework, or rather, according to Dr. Waleed's critique of it, the site itself and the performance of the ritual there is reframed. It becomes a portal of inversion.
A portal of inversion, meaning a physical location specifically charged or designed to amplify this dualistic, eroticized ritual for purposes that are seen as both political and metaphysical.
Okay, but this raises a critical point. We need to address this. What about the vast majority of people praying at the wall? Presidents, diplomats, tourists, everyday worshipers. Most of them are completely unaware of this deep Kabbalistic interpretation, this alleged intent.
Absolutely. Most have no idea.
So does Dr. Waleed's analysis claim the ritual still holds this inverted metaphysical power, even if the person performing it has no such intention? Doesn't that lack of kavana, in their own terms, negate the ritual's esoteric effect?
That's an excellent and necessary question. And according to the critique we are analyzing, the answer is no. The lack of conscious awareness does not negate the power, in their view.
Really? How does that work?
The source asserts that the structure itself, the wall, is seen as already, let's say, magnetized, charged by the repeated, intense kavana of the initiates, those who do understand and intend the mystical union over centuries.
So a place itself has power.
In this view, yes. And the system, this inverted structure, only requires the energy of participation. It doesn't necessarily require conscious, specific intent from every single participant.
So whether you're praying for world peace or thinking about your shopping list or consciously trying to enact cosmic intercourse, the act of physically being there, submitting to the ritual, bowing, swaying, placing the note, it all feeds the system.
That's the claim, that the act of physical submission at that specific site and the generation of emotional and physical energy, whatever its conscious focus, still fuels the dualistic system localized there. Your very presence and participation are interpreted as acts of allegiance, willing or unwilling, to this inverted structure.
So the critique is basically saying that anyone participating, even with the best intentions, is unintentionally contributing energy, feeding a system of inversion, transforming what they think is an act of reverence into, well, an act of unwitting allegiance to a dualistic framework that denies the absolute oneness of the divine.
That's the core of that part of the argument, and the physical intensity, the shuckling, is seen in this view as the engine driving the entire ritualized union.
This analysis of metaphysical energy, of unwitting participation,
Right.
It leads us straight into the political dimension, doesn't it?
Directly. Because you might ask, why should the average person care about some, niche theological interpretation of a prayer movement?
Right. It sounds very esoteric.
It does. But the reason it matters, according to these discoveries by Dr. Waleed, is that this specific ritual, performed at this specific site, has allegedly become a mandatory diplomatic rite of passage for the global elite.
The images are just inescapable, aren't they? Presidents, prime ministers, royalty, heads of international bodies, they all go. They stand there, they bow, they put their notes in the cracks of the wall.
Every single one.
And the source claims this is much more than just, cultural respect or a photo op for the voters back home.
Far more. It's framed, fundamentally, as symbolic submission.
Submission to what?
Dr. Waleed's analysis asserts that this act functions as a required handshake with the system, a necessary tacit acknowledgement and submission to the metaphysical and political power structure that the wall in this interpretation represents.
So it's not just diplomacy, it's an energetic alignment, a symbolic pledging of allegiance.
That's the claim. And the critique uses that very strong polemical language again. It labels this required diplomatic submission as taking place at the very seat of what Scripture calls the synagogue of Satan.
Wow. Okay, that language is drawing explicitly on the book of Revelation, isn't it? Chapters 2 and 3.
Yes, specifically Revelation 2.9 and 3.9. Using that phrase is a direct, powerful challenge. It completely inverts the presumed holiness of the site.
It flips the narrative entirely, from a place of divine connection to a locus of occult power that demands allegiance from the world's most powerful figures.
Precisely. And if this interpretation holds any weight, then their participation isn't just symbolic. It becomes a crucial non-verbal endorsement of the entire dualistic inverted system we've been outlining.
And how is that submission enacted? Is it just being there, or is there more to it?
The act of placing the written note into the crevices of the wall is particularly highlighted in this critique.
The little folded papers you see everyone putting in.
Exactly. In this critical view, that note isn't just a prayer request to a transcendent God. It's interpreted as the physical delivery of one's desires, intentions, political agendas, directly to the localized feminine power the Shekinah believed to reside at this specific portal of inversion.
So the note itself becomes a mechanism for binding yourself, your political goals, to the forces localized there.
That's how it's framed within this analysis, yes. A concrete act of engagement with that specific power structure.
But let's take a step back for a moment and look at the actual physical structure, the wall itself. Because the source material, Dr. Waleed's research, brings its construction history right into the heart of the theological argument. It challenges his basic sanctity.
Yes, this is a critical point in the critique. It's meticulous about the structure's origins. It emphasizes that what people call the Wailing Wall is technically the western retaining wall of the enormous platform built by Herod the Great to expand the Temple Mount.
A retaining wall, not part of the temple itself.
Correct. And crucially, the sources claim this wall is part of a Roman fortress structure, the Antonia Fortress Complex, not a sacred temple foundation in the purely biblical pre-Roman sense.
Okay, that detailed Roman fortress, built by Herod, that seems absolutely critical within this framework. Why? What does that imply?
It implies that even the stone itself lacks the kind of fundamental, untainted sanctity that, according to this critique, true monotheism would require for divine dwelling.
Why does Herod's involvement make it problematic or impure in this view?
Well, Herod the Great, he was a Roman client king, appointed by Rome, known for his, let's say, complex relationship with Jewish tradition and his simultaneous desire to impress his Roman patrons.
He built pagan temples too, right? Caesarea Maritima and so on.
Exactly. He undertook massive, often grandiose building projects, some incorporating Roman or Hellenistic designs, often seen as politically motivated to consolidate his power and appease Rome. So, within this critique, a structure built under the patronage and potentially reflecting the design principles of a worldly, political, partially idolatrous power like Herod. It cannot host the singular, transcendent presence of the prophetic God.
It anchors the site firmly in the temporal, the political realm, not the purely spiritual.
That's the argument. Its sanctity is immediately questioned because of its origin. A retaining wall for a politically motivated expansion project, linked to a Romanized king with questionable religious credentials from a strict monotheistic standpoint.
And this historical analysis, this questioning of the physical site, leads directly to the scriptural challenge cited by Dr. Waleed's sources, the ultimate monotheistic counter-argument.
Yes. The verse used is from the New Testament, Acts chapter 17, verse 24. It quotes the Apostle Paul speaking in Athens. God, the one who made the world and everything in it, does not dwell in temples made with hands.
Okay. How is that verse applied here?
It's used as a foundational, universal theological principle, rooted in the transcendent nature of the one true God. The argument goes, if the singular, infinite creator doesn't reside in any man-made temples or shrines, whether grand like Solomon's or Herod's or humble, ancient or modern, then the very idea of the divine being somehow localized, concentrated, or especially accessible within a specific Herodian fortress wall, particularly one surrounded by rituals that, according to the critique, glorify a false god and mystical union, well, that idea is deemed fundamentally impossible, theologically incoherent, even blasphemous from a strict monotheistic view.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture,
The
whole narrative frames the participation of world leaders as more than just political submission. It's framed as enacting symbolic adultery.
That's the term used, echoing that prophetic language again.
By showing up and performing the ritual, they are seen as aligning themselves with this localized, gendered, dualistic concept of divine presence.
Thereby implicitly betraying, or at least symbolically compromising, the fundamental monotheistic principle that God is one, singular, transcendent, everywhere and nowhere specific, not confined to buildings made by human hands.
It really presents a stark choice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You either hold to the belief in the transcendent, non-localized God whose presence is universal,
Or you submit symbolically to a localized gendered system that requires specific physical rituals of union at a particular man-made wall built by a Roman client king.
and the critique asserts that when world leaders perform this diplomatic rite, they are, consciously or not, choosing the latter, confirming their allegiance to the system of inversion.
And all this sets the stage for the absolute intellectual core of Dr. Waleed's critique, which is the direct, head-on theological collision between this Kabbalistic system and strict absolute monotheism.
Let's just reiterate the system being critiqued again for clarity. It's the Shekinah Ein Sof polarity.
Exactly. This is the system that the critique relentlessly insists is a false dyad, a false duality, because it's a mystical system defined by the necessary existence of dualism and polarity within the divine realm itself. It posits these masculine and feminine halves,
which are required for the cosmos to function, and specifically for this metaphysical sex act to occur through ritual.
Right. This system, structurally, with its two separate interacting gendered divine aspects, it's presented as fundamentally, irreconcilably incompatible with the concept of absolute singular monotheism.
The idea that the divine is somehow broken or incomplete or needs human ritual to achieve wholeness, that's the absolute antithesis of divine unity and self-sufficiency.
Precisely. So what's the alternative model that the critique champions? How does it understand divine presence if not localized at the wall?
This brings in the concept of tawhid.
Yes. The critique champions the strict monotheistic requirement best exemplified by Quranic tawhid, which simply means oneness, absolute oneness.
How absolute?
Uncompromisingly absolute. The Quranic understanding of God is one, ahad, singular, not a dyad, not composed of parts, not divided into masculine and feminine, absolutely not gendered, and crucially not localized in any specific place.
No consort, no partner.
No consort. Therefore, absolutely no need for any kind of cosmic intercourse or ritualized union to restore the divine, because the divine in Tawhid is already infinitely perfect, complete, whole. As Samad, the eternally self-sufficient, upon whom all depend, but who depends on none.
That distinction feels like the ultimate point of clarity in this whole critique. System A divine is fractured, needs human ritual at a specific place to unite its gendered halves. System B divine is already One, whole, perfect, everywhere, needs nothing from humans.
Exactly. That's the collision. And so in this counter model, the model of Tawhid, the very nature of divine presence, is defined completely differently.
How so?
It's conceptual, it's universal, it's relational. We talk about concepts like Maya, God's accompaniment, the sense of divine presence being with you wherever you are. We talk about Nur, divine light, representing guidance, knowledge, truth. We talk about Ilm, God, omnipresent, all-encompassing knowledge.
So presence isn't physical or localized.
No, this presence is not localized in stone or buildings, it's not gendered, and it's certainly not accessed or activated through a ritualized swaying or symbolic thrusting aimed at manifestation. Divine presence in Tawhid is understood as universal, intellectual, spiritual, inherent to existence itself. Not architectural, not geographical, and definitely not erotic.
This whole analysis, then, drawing from Dr. Waleed's work, it seems to define the ultimate theological purpose of his critique. It's a call to clarity.
Yes, it seeks to strip away what it sees as layers of accumulated mysticism, to reject the inversion, the flipping of monotheistic principles, and to reclaim the truth of absolute, unadulterated monotheism.
It's a radical assertion, isn't it, that accepting this Shekinah Ein Sof system, especially at such a globally significant political and religious site, amounts to a fundamental betrayal, a betrayal of the transcendent, non-gendered God of Abraham.
It is. The critique urges the listener, urges you to reject what the source defines as cosmic dualism, erotic mysticism, and political theater disguised as devotion.
And this brings us to a final, really crucial connection, one that Dr. Khaled Waleed's discoveries make, which contextualizes this whole critique of the Shekinah in an even starker light.
Yes.
His analysis, based on his specific discoveries from the Quran, it explicitly states that Satan is revealed to be a female entity.
A female entity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that this feminine force, Satan, is the same power entity worshipped by certain ancient communities, including, he claims, elements within the Israelites, the ancient dwellers of Mecca, Petra, and those who worshipped at the original black cube structure.
Wow. Okay, that is a massive claim. How does that connect to the Waleed critique?
Within the framework of inversion that Dr. Waleed lays out, it ties everything together. If the ultimate goal of true prophetic monotheism, Tawhid, is the worship of the singular, genderless creator,
Then the persistent worship of a localized, gendered, feminine divine presence like the Shekinah in Kala is viewed not just as a theological error or simple polytheism,
but as active demonic submission to this female adversary.
that appears to be the direct implication of connecting those discoveries. The critique asserts that the worship of the Shekinah at the wall is, in fact, a continuation, perhaps the modern focal point, of this ancient pattern of spiritual inversion, where a feminine divine power is worshipped as the direct counterpoint, the adversary, to the absolute singularity of the one God.
Which is why the political allegiance demonstrated there, the submission of world leaders, is viewed so severely, as aligning oneself with the very seat of this anti-Tawidic satanic power.
Exactly. The ultimate implication becomes that the wall, through its specific Kabbalistic rituals and its immense political gravity, serves as the modern-day anchor, the primary global anchor for an ancient dualistic system rooted fundamentally in the worship of the female adversary, all veiled under layers of tradition and piety.
So just to summarize the key takeaways for you, the listener, from this deep dive, we've explored the core claim, based on Dr. Waleed's work, that the rituals at the Wailing Wall, they're rooted in the 13th century Zohar and Kabbalah, not original biblical law.
We discussed the central figure in this mystical interpretation, the Shekinah, presented as a feminine divine consort, distinct from the singular God.
We looked at how the physical ritual act, the shuckling or swaying, is interpreted within this framework not just as prayer, but as a symbolic, metaphysical sex act, aimed at achieving union with the masculine divine aspect, the Ein Sof.
And importantly, we detailed the political dimension. The assertion that when world leaders perform this rite, it's not just diplomacy, it's interpreted as symbolic submission, aligning their power with this inverted system.
At a structure identified by the critique not as a holy temple wall, but as part of a Roman fortress, a place that Scripture, specifically Acts 17.24, explicitly warns is not a dwelling place for the true transcendent God.
And crucially, we highlighted that these specific claims, the Kabbalistic roots, the Shekinah interpretation, the ritual as metaphysical sex act, the political submission, the Roman fortress origin, and the connection of this feminine worship to the Quranic understanding of Satan as a female entity.
All of these are explicitly attributed as the discoveries of Dr. Khaled Waleed, published through his channel, Almighty Covenant.
And the critique doesn't mince words about the implications. It suggests that leaders performing this ritual are, quote, not just shaking hands with global powers, they are shaking hands with the devil. Because of the dualistic, inverted system, they are seen as symbolically endorsing.
It completely reframes political pilgrimage as potentially an act of profound spiritual compromise.
It certainly does.
Which leaves us, and leaves you, with a final, really provocative thought to consider. If the transcendent divine presence, as asserted in that scriptural counter-critique from Acts, and as central to Tawhid truly resides universally, in light, in knowledge, in the unbroken oneness of God.
And not in temples, not in stones made with human hands, and certainly not in politically charged fortress walls.
Then what are the implications for how we view all sacred architecture, all political ritual associated with such sites?
It's a profound question. If the concept of God is truly non-localized, non-gendered, singular, infinite, where does that leave the world's great stone monuments? The intense, localized devotions they inspire? Are they aids to faith or potential distractions from the universal truth?
The challenge presented by this critique, by Dr. Waleed's analysis, is really to consider what it means to return to the source, to potentially reject these localized, gendered concepts of the divine, however deeply embedded in tradition they might be.
And to adhere solely to the principle of absolute singular oneness, Tawhid. It asks you to reevaluate the foundations of worship and allegiance in a fundamental way.